Hi everyone, it's Laura here for SugarPea Designs, and in today's video I'm going to share with you how to create a cute Christmas card with the Merrymaker stamp set. I started by die cutting some watercolor cardstock with the SugarPea Designs Heart Journal card die, and I am now doing some ink blending with my Distress Oxides. I'm using a blending brush and I'm going to use some shades of green, starting from Cracked Pistachio, moving on to Evergreen Bow, and then finishing off with Pine Needles. I'm going for a gradient effect and I'm going to go back and forth in those transition areas between the two colors. So in this case it would be between the Pine Needles and the Evergreen Bow, and lower down where you see that harsh line now, I will go back with my Cracked Pistachio and a little bit more of that Evergreen Bow so that I get a nice and smooth gradient. Blending brushes make it a little bit easier to get these nice and smooth blends, and I really enjoy using them. Once I was done ink blending, in order to add a little bit of extra interest to the panel, I spritzed it with some water from a distress sprayer, let the water reactivate the inks, and then blotted off the excess with a microfiber cloth. I put that panel aside and then I started working on my image, which comes from the Merrymaker stamp set. This is part of a previous release by SugarPea Designs and I think it's really cute. There are 3 images of some adorable elves and it was hard to pick just one for today's card, but I settled for this one with the elf carrying a gigantic present. I stamped the image on Nina Solar White 110 pounds cardstock using some black alcohol-proof ink by Spectrum Noir, and I am doing now some coloring with my Spectrum Noir markers. The color palette of my card will be a traditional green and red palette for Christmas, and I stuck to those colors to color in my images too. I started by coloring the present with some reds, and I used DR6 for my shadows, DR2 for my midtones, and CR8 for my highlights. I started with my darker marker and I added it in the shadow areas. I am assuming that the light comes from the top left of the screen so that you can see that all the shadows are on the bottom right portion of the present. I then blended the darker areas out with my midtone color, and finally I filled in the highlight areas with my lighter marker. For my skin tones, I am using TN3, FS8 and FS9. Also in this case, I added my shadows to the right and lower portion of the face, and I also have a shadow where the face meets the present, which is the shadow cast by the present on the face of the elf. For the hat, the jacket and the shoes, I used some greens and I went for some yellow greens that would match the papers that I used. You will see them later on. I used AG3, AG1 and CG1. Again, starting from my darker marker and blending it out towards the highlights and keeping those lower and right portions of the clothes darker. I introduced some reds to the outfit of the elf, so I colored the trousers and some of the stripes on the t-shirt with my red markers, using the same ones that I used for the present, and I shaded the rest with some cool grays so that the rest of the t-shirt would look white, but there would still be some dimension. Lastly, for the ribbon, I used some gold browns and some golden yellows because I wanted it to look golden. So I started with my GB6 marker, which I laid down again in the shadow areas. I blended it out with a GB4 marker, leaving a lot of space for my midtones and my highlights, because in this portion of the image I actually used 4 markers. The next one is the GY3 marker, so I am mixing color families here to get this golden look. I am blending it with the markers that I already have laid down, leaving a little bit of space for my GY1 that I'm using to blend everything together and to fill those highlights. If I feel like I need to darken the shadows, I can go back with the markers that I have already used and add a second layer to intensify the contrast. And finally, I used those golden browns and yellows for the details on the hat and on the shoes. Once I was done coloring, I die cut the image with the coordinating dies to the Merrymaker stamp set, and I also die cut some of the designs in the Spots and Stripes Brights paper pad. This is a paper pad by SugarPea Designs, and I die cut the background panel using the card front element builder set and the red panel with the Postage stamps dies, also by SugarPea Designs. Next, it was time to work on my sentiment, and I decided to use the Also Jolly sentiments. This is one of the new stamp sets that were released in September, and I really love the look of this scripty sentiment. I chose the greeting that reads Merry Christmas. I stamped it with some embossing ink on my ink blended panel. I coated it with white embossing powder, and then I used my heat gun to heat set the powder. At this point, I started assembling my card, adhering this postage stamp rectangle on my card base, and then I decided to add a little bit of baker's twine to the ink blended panel before adhering it to my card. Because I have the twine on the back, I decided to use some foam tape to create dimension so that I wouldn't have bumps on the card front because of the twine. So I covered the entire back of this panel with my foam tape. I peeled off the backing sheet and then I adhered that to my card front. I decided to use some more foam tape to adhere the little elf to, and I positioned it on the opposite corner of that ink blended background with respect to the sentiment to create some movement on the design. I die cut some snowflakes out of some white cardstock, and these are obtained with a die which is part of the Snowflake Tag set, also by SugarPea Designs. I die cut 2 smaller snowflakes and 1 larger one, and I scattered them on my card front to create a little bit of extra interest. I then mounted everything on a top folding A2 card base that I cut at 4 1/4 by 11 inches and scored at 5.5 inches. And for some finishing touches, I used my Spectrum Noir clear overlay pen to coat the ribbon on the present. I didn't add any more glitter to the card because I wanted the design to look clean. And here you can see the final result. This was really quick to come together, but I think it's really cute with that little elf, and the die-cut snowflakes definitely add a very nice accent to it. And that's it for today. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope I inspired you to create with the SugarPea Designs Merrymaker stamp set. If you haven't already, you can subscribe for more card making and paper crafting inspiration. Thank you all so much for stopping by, and have a great day.